It all started on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where nothing feels urgent and the world just moves a little slower. My grandpa and I were sitting on the porch of our 150-year-old family home, the kind of place that holds more stories than words than bricks. We've lived here for generations, and despite the new developments and shiny new houses creeping in, we stayed rooted. But none of that history mattered when the unthinkable happened. My grandpa clutched his chest and collapsed right in front of me. I panicked, called 911, and within minutes the sirens echoed down our street. Help was finally close. Until it wasn't. That's when she appeared, the HOA president, or as everyone in the neighborhood calls her, Karen. She stepped right into the road with her arms crossed, blocking the paramedics. Can you believe that? She actually stopped the ambulance from reaching our driveway because, according to her, emergency vehicles aren't allowed on HOA-maintained roads without prior approval. I was in shock. My grandpa was fighting for his life, and she was more worried about a patch of asphalt. The paramedics had to argue with her before they could even get through. Every second felt like a lifetime, and I'll never forget the cold look on her face, as if she believed she was doing the right thing. That day changed everything, not just for my grandpa, but for me. What started as a medical emergency turned into a legal battle, a community uproar, and something no one expected. Because what the HOA didn't know was that I'd been working quietly behind the scenes on a project that would flip their power completely. And by the time the dust settled, I wasn't just a resident anymore. I was the one holding the deed to the very land their HOA was built on. Yeah, it got that real. And if you think this was just about some neighborhood drama, wait until you hear what happened next. The thing about old homes like ours is that they're more than just wood and nails. They hold roots, memories, traditions, even secrets. Ours had stood on this land for over 150 years, long before the HOA was even a thought in someone's head. My great-great-grandfather built it with his own hands, and every generation since has added to it in some way. My grandpa especially loved that house. He was born in it, raised a family in it, and planned to take his last breath in it peacefully. Not on a stretcher in front of nosy neighbors and a power-hungry HOA board. After the incident, when he was finally stable, something in me just snapped. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily one person, someone who didn't even know our story, could nearly cost my grandpa his life. And the worst part? Karen didn't even seem sorry. A few days later, we received a formal complaint from the HOA, not an apology, not a wellness check, but a complaint for violating emergency access protocols. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about control and how people like her used the HOA rules as a weapon to push out longtime residents like us. What they didn't know is that I'd been quietly doing research on the land boundaries and property rights for a while now. Our home sat right at the edge of the HOA's development, and something had always seemed off. Their rules, their boundaries, even their authority, none of it ever felt quite legal. I started digging, going through old deeds, maps, zoning paperwork, even county archives. The deeper I went, the more I realized that our family actually owned more than just the house. We had rights to a section of the land the HOA had been using for years, land they were so sure was theirs. That discovery lit a fire in me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth, respect, and maybe a little justice. But pulling that thread unraveled something way bigger than I expected. And once I started, there was no turning back. I started showing up at City Hall so much that the clerk started calling me by name. At first, I didn't even know what I was looking for, just that something didn't sit right. The HOA had always acted like they owned everything, the roads, the trees, even how high our grass could be. But the deeper I looked, the more cracks started to show. Turns out, The original developer who built the HOA neighborhood decades ago had never finalized the land survey. Some of the lots they were managing, including their so-called private road, sat partly on our family's deeded land. Land that had never been sold, transferred, or handed over. No one had noticed because we never pushed back. Until now. I started collecting everything: old plat maps, copies of signed permits, and even an aerial photo from the 1950s that clearly showed the original boundary lines. I brought it to a property attorney just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. He looked it over, leaned back in his chair, and said, "You might be sitting on a gold mine." That's when it all got a little more reland, a lot more complicated. Meanwhile, the HOA wasn't backing down. They sent another notice, this time threatening fines unless we complied with access regulations. And then they started getting sneaky. Random inspections. Anonymous complaints. One day, a notice was taped to our mailbox saying our porch steps were out-of-code steps that had been there since before most of the board members were born. Karen, of course, was leading the charge. I'd see her walking past our fence with her clipboard like she was surveying a battlefield. But I wasn't alone in this. A few other longtime residents started coming forward, sharing their own stories, how they'd been pressured, fined, or even pushed to sell. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my grandpa or my house. This was bigger. This was a quiet war over land, power, and who really belonged here. And the more I dug, the more I realized just how far the HOA would go to protect what they thought was theirs. It all came to a head one night when, I got a knock at the door around 9 p.m., opened it to find a county code enforcement officer standing there holding a clipboard and looking uncomfortable. He handed me a citation for unauthorized structures on my property, referring to the old barn behind our house that had stood there since 1923. I asked him straight up, who reported this? He hesitated, then quietly said, "The HOA." That was the tipping point. They weren't just playing games anymore. They were trying to squeeze us out, piece by piece, paper by paper. I took everything I had: documents, old deeds, photos, legal opinions, filed for a formal land use hearing. The case caught attention fast. Maybe it was because of how long our family had been there, or maybe because more neighbors were stepping forward with their own stories. Turns out, the HOA had been operating in a gray zone for years. Their maps were inconsistent, their enforcement biased, and their claim to parts of the land was based more on assumption than law. Still, they acted like they couldn't be touched. But here's where things got even tenser. A week before the hearing, I started getting strange emails. One's telling me to drop the issue while you still can. Then, a survey marker I had placed near the disputed line disappeared overnight. Someone was watching, and they were getting nervous. I knew if I backed down now, it would all disappear. My grandpa's close call would be forgotten, and the HOA would keep bullying anyone who didn't fall in line. Then came the final Straucherin herself, showed up at my gate. She didn't even knock, just stood there with this smug look and said, "You're making a mistake. You don't know who you're messing with." It wasn't a threat, exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from fire. I wasn't going to let her win. I had the evidence. I had the truth. And now I had a hearing date circled in red ink. Everything was about to come out in the open. The battle line had been drawn. 3 days before the hearing, I got a call from the county office. At first, I thought it was just a routine check or maybe some clarification on paperwork, but the woman on the line had a tight tone in her voice. She said, "We need you to come in. There's been a new submission from the HOA's legal team." I didn't think much of it until I saw what they'd filed. A last-minute claim that they had discovered a historical easement that supposedly gave them the right to control not just the disputed land, but parts of our property too. According to them, this document had just come to light after reviewing archived HOA records. It looked old, official, ... But something about it didn't sit right. I took it straight to my lawyer, and his face dropped. "If this holds up," he said, "it could shift the case entirely." Just like that, the ground I thought I was standing on started to feel a lot less solid. I stayed up all night going through my own copies of land records, trying to understand how something this big could have been missed. That's when I noticed something strange. The signature on the HOA's easement paperwork belonged to a man who'd passed away 10 years before the HOA was even established. They were trying to fake history. Meanwhile, tensions in the neighborhood were boiling over. People were picking sides. Some thought I was just stirring up trouble. Others quietly slipped me notes of support in my mailbox. One older neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, told me she remembered when the original property lines were drawn. She said, "They've always pretended like this was theirs, but it never was." Her memory might be the key to everything. Then came the real. Twist an envelope on my porch with no return address. Inside was a faded black and white photo of the land, marked with boundary lines, and a note. "They've done this before. You're not the first." That one sentence changed everything. Now it wasn't just about saving my home or defending my grandpet. It was about exposing something